Australia, land of kangaroos and deadly spiders, boomerangs and mysterious Vegemite, but behind all the jokes lies a story stretching back tens of thousands of years, way older than most civilizations we know. So how did this isolated continent actually happen? Let's take our time and explore. We begin with the first peoples, the true original Australians. Indigenous Aboriginal peoples arrive at least 60,000 years ago, making this one of the oldest continuous cultures on Earth. Think about that for a moment. While Europe was still covered in ice, these people were already calling Australia home. Ding dong. They gradually spread across the entire continent, from scorching red deserts to lush tropical forests, from rugged coastlines to inland river systems. Over thousands of generations, they develop hundreds of distinct languages. Each group creates songs and spiritual traditions intimately tied to their specific lands. The Dreamtime becomes their foundation for understanding creation itself. This isn't just mythology, it's a complex system explaining how the world came to be. Ancient rock art sites across the continent tell stories older than Egyptian pyramids. Some paintings date back 40,000 years or more. For tens of thousands of years, these communities thrive completely without outside contact. They develop sophisticated hunting techniques. They learn to read the land's seasonal patterns. They create complex trade networks spanning thousands of kilometers. Firestick farming manages landscapes carefully. This isolation shapes everything. No large domesticated animals except the dingo. No metal tools, but incredible skill with stone, wood, and bone. A sustainable way of life that lasts longer than any other civilization in human history. Then everything changes completely. Knock knock. The 1600s bring Dutch explorers bumping into Australia's western coast. They call this mysterious land New Holland, but don't find gold or spices, so they don't stick around long. The continent remains largely unknown to Europeans. Ding dong, again. The year 1770 proves crucial. Captain James Cook sails methodically up Australia's eastern coast. He plants the British flag at Botany Bay and claims the entire eastern coastline for King George III. Britain suddenly has ambitious new plans for this distant land. But why does Britain want Australia so desperately? Well, they just lost America in a rather embarrassing revolution. Oops, they desperately need a new dumping ground for their overflowing prisons. Transportation to America is no longer possible. Australia becomes the solution. And so, in 1788, the first fleet arrives with an odd mixture of people, naval officers and Marines. Free settlers seeking new opportunities. Most importantly, hundreds of convicts serving their sentences. Captain Arthur Phillip establishes Sydney as the first permanent European settlement. For Indigenous Australians, this represents absolute disaster. Their ancient lands get seized without consultation or compensation. Entire communities get pushed aside or completely displaced. European diseases spread rapidly through populations with no immunity. Smallpox alone kills thousands. The expanding frontier brings terrible violence and resistance. Massacres occur on both sides, but Indigenous people face overwhelming technological disadvantages. Colonization leaves deep scars that still echo painfully today. Traditional ways of life face systematic destruction. The 19th century brings rapid expansion across the continent. Ding dong, more colonies get established systematically. Melbourne becomes elegant and sophisticated. Brisbane develops in tropical Queensland. Adelaide grows in South Australia. Perth emerges in isolated Western Australia. Sheep farming transforms the economy completely. Australia begins riding on the sheep's back as wool exports reach markets worldwide. Vast stations cover millions of acres. Merino sheep thrive in Australian conditions. Wealth accumulates rapidly among colonial landowners. Knock knock. The 1850s bring the great gold rushes. Prospectors flood into Victoria and New South Wales seeking instant fortunes. Some actually find them. Mining towns appear overnight throughout goldfield regions. Immigrants arrive from China, Europe, and America. Australia gets much richer and considerably rowdier. Chinese miners face terrible discrimination and violence. The White Australia policy begins forming during this period. European settlers want to keep Australia predominantly British. Racial tensions simmer constantly beneath economic prosperity. Then comes Federation, the great political experiment. After years of careful negotiation, the 6 separate colonies unite in 1901. The Commonwealth of Australia gets born. Independence-ish, anyway. Still under Britain's crown, but now functioning as its own nation. A new parliament gets established in Melbourne temporarily. Plans develop for building a purpose-built capital city. The Constitution creates a federal system balancing state and national powers. A new flag gets designed featuring the Union Jack and Southern Cross. Women gain voting rights immediately in the new federation. Indigenous Australians get completely excluded from citizenship. The White Australia policy becomes official immigration law. World wars hit Australia particularly hard despite its geographic isolation. In World War I, Australia eagerly joins Britain's cause. Young men volunteer enthusiastically for overseas service. Ding dong, the ANZAC legend gets born at Gallipoli. Australian and New Zealand troops face impossible odds against Turkish defenders. The campaign proves disastrous militarily, but something important emerges. Stories of courage, mateship, and sacrifice create a new national mythology. ANZAC Day becomes Australia's most solemn commemoration. The war costs Australia heavily. 60,000 soldiers die from a population of only 5 million. Rural communities lose entire generations of young men. Conscription debates divide the nation bitterly. World War II brings conflict much closer to home. Japan bombs Darwin repeatedly, and submarines attack Sydney Harbour directly. Suddenly, Australia feels genuinely threatened for the first time. The British Empire cannot protect its distant dominion. Australia turns toward America for security guarantees. This relationship proves lasting and shapes post-war foreign policy completely. The ANZAC Treaty formalizes military cooperation between Australia, New Zealand, and the United States. Meanwhile, Indigenous Australians serve with distinction in both wars. They fight for a country that denies them basic citizenship rights. This contradiction becomes increasingly difficult to ignore or justify. The wars accelerate social change dramatically. Women enter the workforce in unprecedented numbers. Traditional class distinctions begin breaking down slowly. Australia starts developing a more independent international identity, separate from Britain. The post-war years bring massive immigration waves that transform Australian society completely. Knock knock. Millions of migrants arrive from war-torn Europe seeking better opportunities. Italians, Greeks, Germans, and Dutch settlers change Australia's cultural landscape forever. The government actively encourages this populate or perish policy. Australia needs workers for ambitious development projects. Cities expand rapidly as suburbs spread endlessly outward. The economy grows steadily throughout the 1950s and 1960s. But Indigenous Australians remain systematically excluded from this prosperity. They were not even counted properly in the national census until 1967. Government policies forcibly removed Aboriginal children from their families. The stolen generations suffered trauma lasting multiple generations. Gradually, movements for land rights and recognition begin gaining momentum. The 1967 referendum overwhelmingly supports constitutional changes. Civil rights activism grows stronger throughout the 1960s and 1970s. Australia starts developing its own distinctive cultural identity during this period. The Sydney Opera House opens in 1973, instantly becoming a global architectural icon. Australian films, music, and literature gain international recognition. Slowly, sports remain incredibly important to national identity. Cricket, rugby, swimming, tennis, and surfing produce legendary champions. Rod Laver, Don Fraser, and others become household names worldwide. Later waves of Asian immigration further diversify Australian society. The White Australia policy gets gradually dismantled during the 1960s and 1970s. Multiculturalism becomes official government policy, though not without ongoing debates and tensions. Educational opportunities expand dramatically. Universities grow larger and more accessible. Australian scientists, artists, and thinkers gain global prominence. Late 20th century Australia modernizes rapidly while grappling with historical injustices. Mining booms bring enormous wealth from iron ore, coal, and other mineral exports. Australia becomes a major supplier to rapidly growing Asian economies. Ding dong. The 1980s and 1990s see Australia developing a distinctive global brand. Crocodile Dundee introduces the world to Australian humor. Steve Irwin becomes the beloved crocodile hunter. Kylie Minogue conquers international pop music. Australia represents beaches, beer, and big personalities. But serious political debates continue simmering beneath this cheerful image. Should Australia become a republic and ditch the British monarchy? Climate change arguments intensify as droughts and bushfires worsen. Indigenous rights struggles continue demanding justice and recognition. The 2008 national apology to the stolen generations marks a crucial turning point. Prime Minister Kevin Rudd formally acknowledges historical injustices against Aboriginal children. This doesn't solve everything, but represents genuine progress toward reconciliation. Culturally, Australia punches well above its weight internationally. AC/DC rocks the world. The Matrix films use Sydney locations. Flat white coffee conquers global cafe culture. Even Vegemite gains curious international attention. Today's Australia remains fundamentally paradoxical. Huge land, relatively small population. Wealthy mining economy, but increasing concerns about sustainability. Proudly multicultural society, but still working toward complete reconciliation with First Peoples. Stunning natural wonders like the Great Barrier Reef and Uluru face climate threats. Political debates rage constantly. Yet Australia keeps reinventing itself through every challenge. From ancient Dreamtime stories to modern democratic institutions, from convict ships to contemporary multiculturalism. That's Australia's ongoing story, by who?